So um, I uh, I have a varied background, but I love learning. I also love working with students, and I love working with small businesses. For over 25 years, I had a consulting business where I developed software and database-driven software, and did data analytics with small businesses and actually small to medium businesses, nonprofits, and government agencies. And I find that very rewarding to be able to provide my passion and skill set to a group that is underserved, most definitely. So tonight we are going to be looking at it's not very technical. So that's something that I want to throw out there. It's really about taking a framework and developing a data-driven culture. And so what I'm going to do is walk you through uh, a, a template that's created in Excel. And I'm going to walk you through the template first, talk it through, kind of get you introduced to the template, and then I'm going to show you a case study. And it's a fictitious small business. It's a bakery. It's a small, business, and they have some concerns because they have problems in the area of data. So it replicates or emanates, if you will, that idea that everyone has a data problem, right? And everyone hopefully hopes for a data-driven culture, but not everyone is able to accomplish that. And that happens. And sometimes it's just not having the right tools, the framework to get it started. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And as we're going through, I may ask questions. And if you want to dialogue, that's perfectly okay. Because as we go through, I hope that you start thinking about the possibilities. Okay. So that being said, you'll be doing some talking too. All right. So let me share the proper template here. And actually, I hope you're able to see my screen. Are you all able to see my screen? Yes. Okay, wonderful. So keeping it simple, this is the framework in general. Okay. So, a lot of folks they're not sure where to start. Okay. And so there's a bunch of tabs at the bottom here that I'm going to be going through that take you through each of these steps. So the first step in creating a data-driven framework that you can use in a data-driven culture is to define your action question. All right. Now, this is an iterative process because no business has just one question or one problem. If they do, they're lucky, and that's wonderful, but that's not likely. All right. So the first step is to define your action question. The second step is to ask yourself, what does this question mean for my organization? If it doesn't have meaning, it's not very useful to the organization. Conversely, if it has high meaning, and typically high pain is associated with high meaning, just so you know, or high level of need, right, is also associated with meaning. So if you find yourself saying we really need to do X, whatever that thing is, well, what's your action question, right? So you find yourself saying, going back to the same thing. So the next thing, which is really important, is how will you know what metrics to use? What are the right metrics to use to address this? And the reason why metrics are important is you have to be able to measure these values, these variables, okay? So these are not qualitative necessarily, but if you find that they're qualitative, you have to convert them into something measurable. And there's ways of doing that. And when we go through the sample, you'll see what I mean. What data do you have? Now, this is the big question. What data do we have? Now, in some cases, there's data, but you don't know how to get to it. There's also cases where there's data, but we don't have time to get to it. And there may be data that we don't know how to get to. These are all scenarios of dark data. So the data is there. We've been collecting it for years, but we don't know how to make an semblance of it. And we don't have the time to really address it. And it could be that a small business doesn't have the IT staff, or they don't have the folks to do the data analysis, or they don't know where to start. The key is starting somewhere, and it might be a simple step in the right direction. It's not accomplishing everything in one fell swoop. It's much better to make a positive step in the right direction than to say, well, I can't do all of it, therefore I do none of it, right? So What data do you have? The next thing is you want to find the metrics that make most sense for you as your business. Not every business is going to have the same needs. And so you want to make sure that the metrics that you come up with make sense for you and your situation. The seventh step is to create the metrics. Okay. And when you're creating the metrics, you have to be thinking about, well, what is a metric and what does that metric need to consist of? And I'm going to walk you through that. The next step is to define a process for using them to make decisions. So let's say you create a metric, but you never use it. You have a metric and that's wonderful, but it's like a car in the garage that never leaves it, right? You don't get to enjoy the ride, right? You don't get to go out and benefit. So once you've created those metrics, you have to put them into a process that allows you to utilize them to make decisions, all right? Because they're tools that take you to that next step. And the last step is to create an implementation action plan. If you've put all these other 8 steps into play, then implementing it is the key. Implementing it is the key to having those metrics do something for you. That's the essence of creating a data-driven culture. Now, this is a very high level. So I'm going to walk you through each step, and we're going to talk about each step as we go. Now, based on this framework, I'd like to get just maybe a sentence or two from each of you as to what your thoughts are about the framework. Does it seem easy to implement? Does it seem difficult to implement? Is it mysterious? Give me some adjectives. What are you thinking about this framework? Like, what part of it maybe are you leery about, or what part you say, oh, that seems doable?
To me, it looks like what you're doing is you're turning data into an action plan.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, perfect. Perfect. So it seems doable. Would you agree?
Having looked under the hood, I'd say I say it's easier said than done, but yeah, it is doable.
Yes. Okay.
I'm wondering, so I do need some samples or ideas how we can
Yes.
define our action question.
Yes. So the next step is to do that. So the next, yep. The next step is to do that. So I have tabs on the bottom here, and each step is broken up into a separate tab. So it's a great process. And but you're exactly right. Making the question or creating the question is a hard thing. And so we're going to walk through how do we get there. So yes, absolutely. Anyone else?
I would say 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5 I'm comfortable with. So it's most times, I mean, I'm at a point now, particularly with grants, you kind of know what you need after a certain point of time.
Right.
And you want to know, then how do I take that information and create some implementation plan in response to it. So that's what I'm comfortable with. But what my tool would be is to do it by hand, and
yes.
And then put it in or then put it into some kind of really simplistic table format, right?
Yes.
But then the next steps for me is creating a more sophisticated way of managing it.
Awesome. I love it. I have a background in grant writing myself. And one of the big things that the folks that give you the grant want to know is, how did you measure success? Right? How did you measure success, and what metrics are you using to measure success?
Right.
And they may provide those metrics, right? But then gathering all that data and making sure that you have accounted for everything is really an important aspect of it. So wonderful, excellent. I love the fact that you have that background, and I think this will be very useful to you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
CRM. I love CRMs. I'm just wondering how it's applicable. Having all my clients, I don't need metrics. Probably I just need the client's data somewhere, somehow.
Yes.
How this one is applicable?
CRM, or customer relationship management programs, right, gather information about your customers. And the information that is gathered is typically very granular, very detailed. right? And so you can gain a better understanding of your customers and where they're at in the process of their journey with you as an organization. So there's something called customer journey mapping. So basically you can track when they started as a customer and what they've done throughout the time that they've been with you. And if you lose customers, gain more customers, you want to attribute it to something, right? And that CRM data is able to allow you to track your customers over time.
So saying that the question number one would be the most difficult.
Yes, yes. So what information is relevant, right? So for example, if you're looking at customer churn, or you're looking at customer retention or customer lifetime value, now you're starting to put that into a framework of meaning, right? So yeah, so the next
choosing CRM would be also applicable task here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So well, and here's the thing, there's many things that drive the CRM. So for example, some packages have the ability to analyze some of that data right within the package, right? So you would actually have an analytics tool built in. So there's the collection of the customer data, there's the reporting and searching and querying, right? And then there's the analytics side, right? So some CRMs, if they're full blown, they have all those tools integrated together, which makes it very easy. Other CRM, and those are kind of pricey, right? Other CRMs have separate modules that you can utilize. And so what happens is you're able to export the data out into Excel, or you know, if it's in a CSV, you can bring it into R and Python for analysis, right? Or SQL Server or what have you. So the beauty of it is if you have a CRM tool or you're searching out a CRM tool, you definitely want something that allows you to get at your data. The more expensive option is if you sign up with, let's say, a service and you have to pay to get your data. That's not a very viable option, not a very sustainable option. You want to be able to get at your data at the point in time you need it. Very, very important. So, you know, there's trade-offs. If budget's an issue, then you have to decide, you know, what is going to give me instant access to my data. If I can get that, then I can analyze it outside of that environment if I needed to, right? Or they may have scenarios where you can add different modules over time. So you might start off with the core module and then add other modules as well. So many different options, many different options.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone else? And
No,
actually,
I used Salesforce once.
Salesforce, yeah.
At which I learned to hate because I felt like it was controlling me rather than me being able to use it as a tool.
Exactly.
Yes, yes, yes. And I'm very familiar with Salesforce, and that's exactly what I'm referring to. As a business owner or a primary in a business, you should never have the software drive you. You should be able to drive the software, right? And you know, it's your data. It's that data you need to gain insights and to grow your business. Catherine, I think you had something you were going to mention. Awesome, good to see you.
Thanks. So my quick question as a maybe example or just to hear a little more, I'm a professional consulting astrologer. And so for over 20 years, I've been working with people either by the phone or recently by the Zoom calls. So the kind of data I collect, for example, is, you know, their name, their date of birth. I collect very personal information. Yep. How many kids do they have? Are they been recently divorced? Or you know, what are their preferences in dating kind of things. I have very personal information about some people. And then, so in some of the problems I'm trying to solve is like, because I've been doing this for so long and now I have new clients who have met me in recent years and now I want to bring them into like a consulting, teaching classes and courses. I'm looking for like solutions on how to keep track of people better, or maybe even like automated replies, like happy birthday, Aries. You know,
yep,
like,
yep, absolutely.
Things that I would keep track of people in a better way that, and as some of you know who are, you know, in the business world, your repeat customer, it's easier to retain or generate more business from a repeat customer than trying to
acquire a
new person. So the customer relations part, I think, is valuable.
Mhm.
Those are a few things that I'm looking at in addition to wherever this is going. Thanks.
Absolutely. So what you're talking about is creating personal customer touch points. And so there's that piece, but there's also the personal, data piece and obfuscating anything that you don't want to be, visible to others, and being careful that, only certain individuals have access to that information. So again, these are things where you're looking to measure certain things about your customer relationship that then takes your business to the next level. So for example, and we'll get to some metrics, but the frequency of contact or the duration of contact with a customer or the method of contact, those are all pieces that when you look at customer journey mapping, you can actually place that on a timeline and see what does that do? How does the customer respond? And you can actually do sentiment analysis on that. So every touch point, you could actually get some feedback from your customers as to whether or not that was helpful for them, whether or not that helped them along in their journey, or whether or not it, was a deterrent or a barrier in some way. And then you might modify how you contact. So for example, sometimes people feel, I get emails from people all the time about this, and this, and I feel like they're spamming me, or, right. And we don't want to spam, right? So to spam or not to spam is always the question. So we can measure that response to the contact point and determine, is it positive, favorable, or not, or maybe neutral? And then we can modify how we respond or engage in the next step. So this is where keeping track of the sentiment of your customers is essential. Same thing if you have different product offerings. So you might have different events, workshops, engagements where you're meeting with your customers. Well, what were their impressions of that? And getting feedback that then can be looped back into that CRM situation so that you can determine, are these types of events worth investing time and money into, or effort, right? Or are they not viewed as very beneficial? And do we do something else? Do we invest our resources elsewhere? All right. So that's a great observation. Anyone else? No? All right. All right. So we're going to go to step one. Okay. So step one is what action related question needs an answer. So typically what you would do is you would list in these boxes here the areas that you want to explore further. Now, I have some samples here, and some of you have touched on these samples. Recruiting customers, process efficiency, marketing materials development, employee recruitment, social media content messaging, program development, data collection and analysis, and customer satisfaction and retention. Those are just some of them, right? But you have to ask yourself, what is the overarching umbrella around this question, right? So the area that's being explored would come from a list like this. So you would enter those in here. And in the sample, I'm going to show you how I did this for that bakery that I mentioned, okay? This is not an exhaustive list, just so you know, but it's a classic list, right? So if we have customers, of course, we want to know how to recruit and retain them, right? If we have any kind of process, whether it's mailings that you do, machinery, manufacturing, retail, it doesn't matter. You have some kind of process if you want to make it more efficient. Obviously, that's going to be an area. So whatever your area is, you have to then come up with some action-related questions. And what you're going to do is put the area here and then create the tactical question. Now, this is where it gets hard. What type of question is a good question, right? So think of it this way. I have to be able to quantify it. So I have a list of 5 requirements for your question. The question should have variables that are measurable and testable. So let's go to the examples, some of the examples we heard earlier. And what I'd like the audience to do is come up with one thing that one of the members has mentioned, one of the attendees, and say, well, this is how I think it could be measured. Okay. Kind of like a game, right?
Can you make the screen a little bit bigger?
Absolutely, I can. So let's see, I can zoom in. Does that help?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Yep. All right. Thank you so much. It's hard to tell how others can see my screen, so this actually is better for me as well. All right. So I think I will start. So I'm going to use the example of the customer touch points. Okay. So the question that would have variables that are measurable and testable. How often do I contact my customers? Right. And you could do it in days, weeks, months, right? So how often would have a number associated with it? So that could be measurable and testable. So how often and when? So if you want that temporal plane, which is the when, I contact them weekly on Wednesdays, right? And I did this in April of 2021. Could we in fact identify every Wednesday in April of 2021? The answer is yes. Could we determine that they were contacted? Yes. Can we determine who was contacted? Yes. Now we have something that's measurable and testable. Okay. Anyone else come up with the first one? Again, the question has to have variables that are measurable and testable. What do you think? And you can pick one of these areas here and say, okay, I'm going to try one for employee recruitment, or I'm going to try one for program development, and come up with a question that is measurable and testable. And if you can't think of anything, that's okay. I can tell you, I can think of some. So
social media content messaging.
Yeah. Okay. So how would we, what question would we have with variables that are measurable and testable?
When you have the content plan in place, you do want to see, to test, for example, which day of the week is most efficient to be posted, how many reactions, social engagements.
Yes.
Happening.
Excellent. Excellent. So when you send, let's say, out a tweet, right, you can determine how long from that tweet you started getting, likes, you started getting replies, perhaps retweets, right? So you can say from the moment I sent it out there, it went viral or it went nowhere, right? We could kind of track it. So you know when it was put out there, and then you can gauge from how long it took people to interact with it, whether or not there was more likes than maybe dislikes, or maybe what have you. So that's an excellent example. And a lot of folks will use a calendar type system to track, when that campaign went out and what was the result of it and the sentiment possibly.
Yep.
Yep. So
I
that's
actually posted something on Facebook on June 12th or maybe the 13th, and got quite a response. We had 143 interactions over 2 weeks.
Wow.
So we created a group to sort of focus the response, and we had 58 members overnight.
Look at that.
Wonderful.
And, well, it is actionable because we're actually organizing a protest. So
but how do you know? How would you know this protest would gain a lot of traction? This protest would not.
Yeah.
Well,
maybe
we
it's sentiment or maybe it's concept.
Exactly. We're trying to, it is controversial. There are two sides to the story. Okay. And we are developing our messaging strategy and trying to be disciplined on the messaging so that we can continue the growth that we're getting and perhaps affect change.
Excellent. Excellent. So that's something that, and I think you hit a lot of the measurable and testables, right? You know when, you know where, you know how many responded. So now you have things that you have, if you think of it, who, what, where, when, how, and why kind of deal, right? You can then tie them to the variables that are measurable and testable.
We're distributing a petition beginning next week.
Right. And so you can
we'll see the numbers on that.
You can determine, right, exactly. So you're looking at response, right, in that case. So did they respond or not? That's binary, right? Yes, no. When did they respond? And then if you're measuring any sentiment, what was the nature of this? And you can gauge, the crowd and who's feeling what. And then balanced or the other way. That then guides you into the next steps and what you're going to do with that information. So that creates insights that allows you to guide your next actions. So that's wonderful. I'll see. Anyone else? For the sake of time, we might go forward. I think you folks have the good idea about this. The variables should be operationally defined. So I mentioned the who, what, where, when, and how. That's how you operationally define it. So the who is what individuals are responding, right? And in your case, Jerry, you know, the group that you've established, those individuals are associated with that group. So you know the who, you know. If it's when, you have the date and time, right? If it's how, you have whether it was on Facebook or a text message or what have you. So now you're operationally defining it, and that's telling you where that information is coming from. Very important, because some channels by which information used to come from no longer exist or no longer conducive. And you might have to invest resources into just this and funnel everybody into the same location for you know, sanity's sake, right? If you start missing data and losing data, you might have to channel everything into a single source, single location, so that you can better control it. All right. All right. The other thing that's super important is the question should align with organizational goals and objectives. So we all know that businesses have goals and objectives. Increase sales, you know, decrease customer turnover or customer churn, increase revenue, increase growth, right? Diversify my product offerings, right? These are all things that, you know, every organization has goals and objectives, whether they're nonprofit, profit, what have you, right? So you want to make sure that your question aligns with the objectives, because at some point there may be a mission statement, a strategic plan. If it's a grant, there's obviously overarching, you know, goals and objectives for the grant, and you have to be able to loop that back around to show that you did meet those goals and objectives. So whether it's organization and or project and or it's that overarching thing that is, you know, causing you to put yourself into this framework. Avoid yes no questions. Anything that could be answered with yes and no pretty much is answered yes and no. And then the next question is, well, so what? If it's yes, what does it mean, right? What does it mean? So you want to avoid those types of questions because it's an easy out. It doesn't let you drill further. So you want to say to yourself, okay, I need questions that have some substance. They have to be important. They have to be detailed. And of course, the question should be relevant, specific, and timely. If it's not relevant, it could be that it's not appropriate for the given point in time, given the organization, given the political climate, given the, you know, for example, COVID turned many businesses upside down, right? And they were just trying to stay afloat, right? And so they weren't able to entertain questions that were relevant given the, you know, the time factor was an issue. That does not mean that those questions can't be jotted down for future reference. So I think it's really important to recognize that there is a time and place for everything. And when you get to the point where it is timely and, you know, a good idea to broach the subject, then make sure they're relevant and specific. Okay. All right. And you're going to see examples of questions when I bring up the case study. All right. Step 2. So once you have, and I'm going to just maximize or go into this a little bit. Once you have identified, you know, you have a question in mind, who cares about the question? Is there anyone in the organization that cares? So what you would do is list the organizational roles in each of these boxes, and level 1, level 2, level 3 typically models after the hierarchy of the organization. So level 1 would be C-suite, president, you know, executive level. Level 2 would be maybe middle management, and then level 3 would be other valuable staff and resources that you rely on, other individuals, other employees. So you would list those, and then what you would do is you would list in each box for that individual the specific information that they are interested in, okay? And so we'll give an example. The president of an organization is interested in return on investment. They're interested in meeting the strategic goals, strategic plan related goals, right? So they're going to have their perspective. Whereas other individuals might be interested in benefits. You know, maybe they're employees that are interested in benefits. And maybe, yeah, it's part of their job to collect some data, but they want to know what's in it for me. What's it going to do for my job, for this organization? You know, is my data that I collect going to get tossed aside and never used? That's a classic question I get. You know, it's like I worked so hard to get that data filled in and it just went by the wayside and it never got utilized. So some of their concern might be, okay, so I collect the data and I make sure it's complete and it's accurate. Where does it go next? How can I be part of the process, right? And this could be any individual that is part of the organizational culture, okay? The big thing that I teach, and I'll mention it here, is data democratization. Data democratization is where you create a system in an organization where some people have access to the data and some do not. Some people benefit and some do not. And you don't want to create a scenario where you're demanding a data-driven culture, but people they don't have access to the data. You want to create equality in how people benefit from the data. Now, that's not to say that individuals would see maybe security type information or confidential information and things of that nature. But you want to make sure that they understand that there is some data that they can benefit from, and that you, as a steward of the data, are going to ensure that they benefit from it. So you want to start thinking about the organization and who cares and so on. Now, once you identify what they care about, you want to then color code these boxes down below based on their priority. Do they care about it a lot? Is it high priority? Is it medium? Are they or is it low? And you'll see when I show you the case study how that's done. So for example, if someone cares about something very high priority and you have that on level 1, 2, and 3, you're going to make sure that that's front and center. You're going to put additional resources and effort into making sure that those priorities are met. That creates a catalyst for discussion. If everything's low priority, then you have to ask yourself, why is that the case? Do we have a morale problem? Do we have a culture that is apathetic? And do we need to address those issues before we bring in this data-driven culture, which no one wants to hear about, right? So remember, a lot of it has to do with measuring the sentiment of your organization to see where are they at mentally. You know, are they even in the same mindset, or are they just so frustrated that they don't even want to talk about it? All right, next step. The next step, and again, this is a hard one. Are you able to see my screen okay? Yeah? Kind of, sort of?
Me, yes. Anybody else?
Okay. Everyone's good. All right. I just want to make sure. I have a wide screen and sometimes, so the question becomes, what metrics could be used to answer the question? All right. So you have some questions that you developed in the first step. And that's down here. Okay. And then on step 3, you have to ask yourself what metrics can be used. I'm going to give you an example. So metrics are going to be things that you can use to measure. So customer churn has a formula associated with it. Customer lifetime value has a formula associated with it. A lot of these things, these metrics, have formulas that are associated with them. And if you're not sure what they are, hint, hint, wink, wink, you can Google them, right? So you can look at customer relationship management metrics. What are the common KPIs, key performance indicators? Or let's say you want to look at marketing related KPIs. You can Google those, right? So I have a small list that you're going to see in my case study, but it's not exhaustive by any means, by any stretch of the imagination. All right. I usually teach entire classes on key performance indicators and where those metrics come from. And it's usually based on a given domain. So if it's in a marketing domain, that's going to be all marketing speak. If it's in finance, it's going to be finance speak. If it's in, it's based on context. So that's the overarching, picking the right metrics. So you're going to take one of your questions and then contextualize it and write a brief response. So the first one is, what specific decisions do you want to be able to make based on the answer to your question? So let's say your question was, how can I retain more customers, right? So your first question would be, well, what specific decisions do I want to be able to make based on the answer to my question? Do I have any power over retaining my customers? Is there anything I can do as an individual? Now, this goes from the president on down. It goes down to the customer service rep, the person at the counter, the clerk, right? Every individual has the ability to be a part of this equation. So let's say customers are frustrated and they're leaving your organization because their needs are not being met. Well, those needs are a function of every touch point in that system. So the clerk might say, well, what can I do about it? Right? And maybe you identify that there are certain things that that individual can do. So what decisions do you want to be able to make? And if you're the president or the manager making these, you may decide to handle that situation differently. Okay. The second one, what things will you need to understand in order to prepare you to address your question? So let's say you don't understand the nature of your employees and what they're going through. Let's say they've been charged with doing the marketing for your organization, but you haven't given them the tools to do your job, right? And Jerry's smiling, right? I see you, Jerry, right? And so let's say you need to better understand the nature of the experience and maybe frustration, concerns, and what have you of the individuals that you've put in play to handle that. Does that make sense? So if Jerry was filling this out, Jerry's answers to this would be very different than the president, right?
Yeah,
You see,
the reason I'm smiling, which I think you know, is I asked several times in my former job for more social media presence and more CRM capabilities, and was turned down every time.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
so.
And that's a limiting factor. Absolutely. So here's the thing. If I were the business owner or manager and I was seeing Jerry's responses to this and I was having my own responses, I would say, where's the disconnect? How can we create a data-driven culture? And that's how you coalesce and you pull those pieces together. Very important, right? So it's not just one individual that's doing the response to this, by the way, folks, it's everybody. It's a data-driven culture, so it's the entire organization. And then the last one is, will any answer to your question feel successful, or will you need to achieve something specific to feel successful? And I think Jerry's case is easy. Just give me access to it. Just let me have access, right? Let me be a part of it so that I can then take it to the next level. So in many cases, this third one is easy peasy to answer, but we all know it's not as easy to get to that next step because there's going to be barriers, right? And the goal, if you're creating a data-driven culture, is to get rid of or limit or lessen those barriers. All right.
Question.
Next. Yeah.
Before we go
absolutely.
next, before we go so far, maybe we can bring some samples or ideas, discussions with grant writing. What's the metrics there can be?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Ramona, do you want to share, or would you, do you have something to offer? If not, I have some thoughts, some ideas.
What was the question? What, in response to what she said?
Just specifically how it would be applicable to grant writing, what metrics could be used to answer a specific question?
Well, for example,
give us ideas.
I'm
Yes.
thinking, well, your first when you listed all the different areas like program development.
Yes, these guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Program development. You know, what we used to do is, well, I'm retired now, but we used to.
Is your mic, Ramona, covered a little bit? We're having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, no worries. It's better now. Thank you so much.
So, for example, you know, developing a series of workshops, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not in necessarily response to asking your participants what you want, although that could be part of it. Because I was just thinking about what you were saying in terms of your customer base. So in terms of grant funded, you're working with kids, for example. I worked with middle and high schoolers. So, you know, they were our customers, right?
That's right. That's right.
We were serving them. And so it would be, so you create a series of workshops with the hope that students are going to participate, or you create a series of workshops for parents and you want parents to come and attend.
Mhm.
And then some of them would be attended very well and others would not be. And
That's
so
right.
we would do a couple of things. Like we would look at a particular day, right? Well, maybe Thursdays are better than a Wednesday. We know kids don't necessarily come to what we learn in terms of looking at attendance is that springtime is not a good time to be offering a lot of workshops, particularly on a Friday.
Yes.
Because no one is coming to an after school program on a Friday when
Yeah.
the weather is nice and and hormones are all over the place, right? So so a metric for us, and this is very infantile, right? Because we didn't have a system in place to do this. I would literally do this by hand, right? And you do the little 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5, right? And then
Mhm.
the other thing is to start looking at the workshops and then who's actually coming. So let's say you have 10 workshops, you have a series of different attendance numbers, but then you may have, 5 kids that came, 10 out of 10. You have
Yep.
others that came 8 out of 10, others that came 1 out of 10.
Yep. Yep.
And then what my staff would do is go back to the ones, the twos, but then you have to track it, in a certain time frame, right?
That's right. Mhm.
Because you don't want to wait until the workshop is the series is over to then
That's
find
correct.
only 2 kids showed up and they showed up intermittently, right?
That's
So
correct. Yeah.
then it's like, oh, well, we had day 1, day 2, oh, day 3, something happened, a bunch of kids didn't show up. Now we have to call them up and find out, well, what was happening in day 3 or
Mhm.
workshop number 3? Were they from the same school? Because maybe something was happening at school
Mhm.
and there was a competing, activity.
Right. Right.
It was all of that.
Mhm. But the overarching metric is engagement.
Is engagement.
That's engagement. Yep.
Yes.
And so when you're defining it, you've actually done a great job of defining each of those. You have the frequency of engagement, the duration of engagement, and also the linearity. So from day to day, you're looking for a daily engagement. If they miss a day, they've broken that, right? So now the daily metric is measuring the daily, the weekly, right? Or if it's monthly, you would do it monthly, right? So that overarching is engagement. And maybe one of the goals of the grant is to increase engagement, and maybe on the part of the student and also the parents, right?
Yes.
We
Yes.
want, or community, right? So now you've got 3 different constituencies, you've got 3 different groups, and you want to be able to measure that separately, right? So by gathering that data, and it could be as simple as a spreadsheet, you would be able to pull all those out. And that's what's really nice about it. I think one of the biggest problems is there's not enough thought process prior to going into that. So I've actually run after school programs and summer programs, camps for kids in robotics and computer science and game design, and for grant purposes. And we had to keep, it's not just attendance, you're here or you're not there, it's everything. Did they eat lunch? Did they go outside and get fresh air? Because that's part of it. You don't want them sitting by a computer all day. Diversity and engagement as well, so that they got fresh air and they also got collaboration with group, right? So we had all these different things that we had to keep track of. We did paired programming, so we had to make sure everybody was paired properly, and that was a positive experience. And so I think those are that's all engagement, right? And then of course, if it's based on activities, you could actually have their perception of the type of engagement. So maybe they like this workshop but they don't like that workshop, or they like this activity or exercise but they don't like that one, and you can have them rate it on a scale of 1 to 5 and gather, use a Likert scale, have a little survey at the end, right? And they fill it out, and then you pull that data in, right? so those are all pieces that, again, all quantifiable, and a great way. And I mean, those types of programs, which I'm very familiar with, is a classic because you've always got that engagement, right? And so that's something that definitely would be a doable one.
So let me just jump in one more thing. So if you go to your next slide, when you were talking about the different levels and the priorities, and so what I was thinking in my brain is, oh yeah, no one on the upper end really cared about engagement, and so that became a staff concern, right?
Right.
So really honing in with my staff in terms of how to why collecting that data was important.
Exactly.
Right? Now, if I stepped up and went to my supervisor, and I said, oh, our attendance was really good. Oh yeah, that's really good. But then what they would want to see is like what you were saying in terms of the overall report.
That's right.
How did this all tie together?
That's right. And you raise a great point. I would say that in the level 1, you would also have the state or whoever gave you the funding, right? Because if it's from the state, they care and it's high priority, right? And sometimes in getting your staff to understand, in my case, the whole thing was, we want the government, the state, to give more funding for these types of coding programs, these computer science programs, because it's helping a lot of underrepresented students get access to scholarships, get access to a variety of things that they normally would not have. And so that then was communicated to the staff so that they say, you know what, this is helping students get on with their education. We have to think forward. We can't just think about the moment. We have to think about what this is going to turn into. Will this grant be perpetual, and will it renew every year? Are we actually helping the next generation? And start thinking about it outside of the box. And once we realized that became, a catalyst for change, people got excited about it. And they felt like, hey, I have ownership in the process. That's the data-driven culture. That's that what I do matters. It means something. And even if it's checking a box, it means something. It's a data point that has value. And I think that's something that sometimes, staff, like I had some interns working with me, and they're like, how many boxes do we have to check? Why do we have to do this? No one's going to look at this anyway. And I said, well, I'm going to look, and that's getting them to understand that what you do matters. And this is why, and having that discussion with them. And then it made sense, but they had no idea the behind the scenes. They had no idea the big picture. And sometimes you have to break it down for them and explain that this is super important for this reason. And they're not necessarily going to make those connections. And that's part of fostering and cultivating that data-driven culture. And then they get it, and then they get excited about it. And then they look forward to gathering that data, So I'm so glad you shared that example, because that is really, really important. And those dynamics, just so you know, also take place in the business environment. It takes place in many environments where it's like, well, why should I bother? This data never goes anywhere. It doesn't help anyone. Am I going to get a raise? That kind of thing. They're talking about laying people off, and you want me to gather data, so just helping people to understand that there's a bigger picture. And that's really that cultural development, that cultural change, the cultural shift that you're creating. Excellent. 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 Any other observations? That was wonderful. Wonderful. Any other observations before I go to the next one? All right, awesome, awesome. All right, so the next step is, and this kind of ties into what we were just talking about. So excellent. I'm going to zoom in just a tad, just a tad. All right, so the next thing, what actions could you take? Notice the emphasis on you, that would have an impact on your action question. Now, notice that if you're filling this out as the business owner or the person in charge of the grant, your perspective is going to be different from everybody else's, right? So you would have your staff fill this out as well as you, right? What actions could you take that would have an impact on your action questions? And then down below, what actions could your employees or constituents take that would have an impact on your action question? So one is, you versus your employees, so both of you. The other is, okay, I want to know what my employees are thinking. This is what I'm thinking. What are they thinking? Right? So you've got two perspectives. So these are the same as far as grid goes. It's just about a perspective difference. Okay. So in the first one, and again, I have a sample all filled out. The action that you, let's say you knew that your staff was empathetic, right? And your question is basically, you know, why can I not get the staff to fill out these sheets? You know, I need this data collected, and I'm not able to get this done. So I have a completeness problem. My data is incomplete, and I need to figure out. So your action would be, how can I get staff engaged in the process, right? That's the action. And what would be a good metric to determine that my staff is engaged in the process? I have to have my constituents engaged, but my staff is part of that. So you could have two of these, one for the attendees and one for your staff. So the metric that you would be looking at is the completeness of the form being filled out, right? So percentage of completeness, right? Percentage of accuracy, percentage of legibility. Let's say sometimes they get sloppy with how they fill it out, and maybe they make mistakes, or perhaps, you know, it's hard to determine, is this kind, you know, did they check off this box, or it's a Likert scale? Did they fill out this circle or that circle? So completeness, accuracy, you know, readability, that might be, those might be metrics with respect to the data collection process, right? And then you're asking my ability to affect the measurement through your own actions. If I create a mechanism by which the staff can easily fill out that form where there's no question, can I do that? Do I have the ability to affect the measurement through my own actions? Well, let's say your staff, and this happened with my interns, just give us tablets, give us iPads, so we could just open up the Google form and go boom, boom, boom. Oh, that's all right. I like that idea. And because they were younger folk, and that was something they didn't want paper and pencil, they wanted an iPad. So I said, you know what, we can do that. And what's really cool is I can then get the data on Google and Google Sheets, and it's a centralized place. That's a great idea. So by just doing that one thing, we borrowed some iPads, we were able to then, and I got permission. So my ability to affect measurement was I gave them the tools that they needed to move it forward, right? Now, the next question is, if you measure this, how many in your organization would care? Well, in the case of the grant that I was working on, everyone in the organization wanted it to succeed. So they wanted to make sure that it was a success because they knew that it would help the organization and the students that were part of the process. So I could put a 5 on here. This is basically a span of 1 to 5. So 1 through 5. If nobody cares, you put a 1. If they somewhat care, you put a 2. So this is like a Likert, but you're assigning a number in this box. Okay. So 5 is the entire organization cares. If you measured it, you know, does the organization care that these forms are filled out completely or not, right? And to what extent? The next question is, to what extent would seeing a measurement for this help your organization? So at the next staff meeting, you're presenting this and you're saying, now that they have iPads, we're able to get a better picture of what's going on in our camps. We're getting a better picture as to the success of the after school program. We're getting a better picture of customer retention or customer engagement, right? Or customer growth, right? Or customer, or product buy-in, you know, they seem to like the features. Now that we see their sentiment, we know not to sell this product. We're going to sell this product. Is everyone happy that we're seeing a measurement that answers our question? Yes, they don't like this product. It's not worth stocking. Let's get rid of it. Let's phase it out and move on to something else. So, you know, if they're completely transformed and they feel it makes a big difference, then you put a 5. If it's only slightly, you put a 1. If it's in the middle, you go with a 3. So anything between 1 and 5. It gives you kind of a Likert scale of whether they're seeing that this measurement is going to help the organization. And again, remember, this is about you taking action to impact your question. So you have to be the conduit. You have to let them know and communicate all the steps along the way. That's what's really important. That's part of that culture.
And
the next
question for solopreneurs. How would it affect solopreneur? like Catherine, for example, or legal attorney?
Yes. So basically, we could use this to gain perspective with our customers. So let's say customers don't have enough information. They're craving information, or they don't feel as informed about your products and services. Or let's say they don't know about the value that you offer, or they don't fully understand the product or service. These types of actions, and so instead of, the organization, you could flip it and say my constituents, the people that care. So that's where down here, right, instead of employees, we would be on the constituent side. If, let's say, we're a solopreneur, our customers are our constituents, the people that we liaison with, the ones that we want to retain. So down here, that would be, this would be you. Down here would be your constituents, and you would want to get an idea. How do my customers feel about this, right? So I'm about to take action using this metric, right? What's my ability to affect measurement through my own actions? Let's say I need my customers to respond to a survey. I need them to dialogue with me and provide some feedback, right? So your ability to get them to have a high response rate on that survey is going to be very important. So the action is the constituent, right? And your impact is you getting them to complete the survey, high response rate, high touch point with the customer or the constituent, right? If you measured this and they don't care, then that's a problem, right? So if you're measuring it and you're telling them, you know what, we want your feedback, your input is valuable. Do you feel that you're valued and that you're, the entire organization, even if I'm a solopreneur, my company values your, opinion. And if they say, absolutely, the entire organization does, then that's a high engagement metric that's been met, right? If they see that what they tell you matters and it's going to transform their ability to work with you or to gain services from you or even to benefit, receive that value, then of course that's going to fully transform or completely transform your business. Okay. So that's very important. And then of course the same thing down here. To what extent would your organization's actions quickly change the measurement? So if let's say your organization says, if we get this feedback from our customers and we analyze it and we determine that we should be offering X, Y, or Z, would that make a difference, customer? Would that help you? And if they say absolutely yes, you have the ability to affect change. And that's where the usefulness score would be high. All right. So I'm going to go back to this one. The measurement's the same. So if I had a 5 in each one of these, let's just say my usefulness score would be a 15. I'm just adding them up. Okay. So I'm going to show you in the sample in a minute what that looks like. So you get an aggregate score of the usefulness for each action. And if I were you, you could start with one action, keep it simple, or you could do a multitude of actions. Remember, Rome wasn't built in a day. Okay. So how useful is it? The next step is the extent to which data is available for your metrics, the measurement piece. Okay. Now, this is easy, but maybe not so easy. So let's go through this. The metric from the previous sheet is basically going to be, what am I measuring, right? So let's say it's number of orders or percentage of engagement. Let's use that one, right? Well, that would be the percentage of engagement. All right. What data is manually entered into the system? Well, if you're using a form that they're filling out, it's all the data. It's the number of times they attend, the days of the week, whether they missed a day, all those pieces, what related data is manually entered in. So what you would do is you would list them in this box here, and you can make these taller, by the way. You can actually make this so it's as tall as you need it, right? So you kind of just use this box and adjust it accordingly, the height of the row, okay? Then the next thing is, what related data is automatically tracked by a system? Now, if you don't have that, right, because you're in manual, that's fine. So if you have data that comes into a system like an order entry system, or let's say in the iPad system, it went to the Google Sheets. Let's say there's some kind of tallying going on, right? If there is something that's automatically tracked, right, then you find that out. Maybe you're scanning, IDs as they come in the door, right? you know, you have some kind of a scanner. That would be manual. So you might have a blend, or you might just be all manual. So you basically determine, is it manual and what is it? And if it's automatic, what is it? What's, you know, coming in related to that metric? Then you ask yourself, what additional data about actions, perceptions, processes could be collected by staff? This is something where you may ask your staff to rate the emotions in the response, the collecting process. And, you know, you have to ask yourself, okay, you know, people don't like to be spied on, obviously, but let's say you want them to use a very simple way of determining that people were happy to fill out the data, not so happy, stressed. You want to identify, how was that data collection process? Was it difficult? Was it problematic? Is there something that maybe we need to do? Maybe provide some kind of tools, you know, for example, you know, if I just had an eraser, it would have been better because I made a mistake and I didn't know how to fix it. And I made a mess of the form. If I could just get a darn eraser, right? Something silly. So what was their perceptions, right? Are they happy to do it? Is there something going on that perhaps you could intervene to facilitate collection? That's what you're jotting here. And there, you might not have anything, right? Or maybe you made a change the day before and it's working better. And you might just notate it, the process seems to be working better now, you know? So that's something that, and you might do this ahead of time. You might foresee it based on last experience. So you might say, well, based on last time, these were the things that people were really upset about. You know, they didn't have, you know, some kind of clipboard to lean on, right? Something as silly as a clipboard, right? You can get it from the dollar store, but because they didn't have a surface to write on, that created stress. So knowing that from past times, you can say, you know what? Make sure there's clipboards, make sure we have this, this, and this. You know, if we need to get supplies, make sure we're ready to rock and roll with supplies. If let's say you need IT, let's say it's an IT issue, make sure IT's by our side. In the case of the grant, probably not so much, but maybe with a, you know, either a small business or what have you, anything that you could think about that would facilitate the process as far as collecting the data from its source, you want to jot that here. And then you want to ask yourself, what data could you get from other organizations or other public sources? It might be census data. It might be other data that would be helpful in some regard. Okay, it's not always the case, but maybe, you know, just getting an understanding. I'll give you an example. And this is one that, you know, was related to the grant that I worked on. We had people, there was a busing problem and kids couldn't get there and mom and dad couldn't drive it because they had to go to work. So then we realized that, okay, logistically, we have a problem. We have some coming from, you know, rural areas. And because there's no bus, it's the summer, you know, we might need to get, there was a driver service close by that was willing to volunteer their time. And once we identified that because of the location, we did the mileage check and say, oh my gosh, they're coming from 45 miles away. I had no idea. No wonder they can't get to camp. You know, no wonder. So had I not Googled it and you know, determined where they were coming from, I wouldn't have realized that, you know, there was construction on the route. It was hard to get there and it made perfect sense. There was a whole bunch of barriers. So once I know there's a bunch of students in the same boat, I can then say, okay, what are we going to do next? How can we address this?
And I just realized time check.
Yes.
And we have 4 more to go.
We have 4 more to go, and then the example to go really fast. So I think we could wrap up by 7:45. Is that okay? For everybody? Are you sure?
You can always drop out.
That's true. And we're recording. So I'm okay to stay till 7:45. Again, we've had some really great examples and we definitely want to discuss those. So I think we've had some really good discussion. So thank you for the time check. And we are moving right along. All right. The next one, collecting data to get this metric. All right. One would require a significant investment or we already have it. So let's say you already have the data, you give it a 10. Let's say you have to go out and buy a clipboard. Well, my goodness, you're at a 9 because they're talking 99-cent clipboard, right? Let's say you need an entire new IT system, a whole new server, and that's a 1. That requires a large new investment. So it's important that you do make a determination. If there's a collecting data problem, what extent is it going to take to fix it? and make sure that you're accurate with this. This will give you a gauge on feasibility. This is really about feasibility. And in the case of a grant, if you know ahead of time that there's resources in the grant for equipment, right? Then you know ahead of time, given that we need to do this, we're going to have to put in for equipment. We're going to, we've got supplies, but we've got equipment, and the grant provides for that. Or if you're a small business, we can budget for it next year, or we can determine what it's going to cost and start getting price quotes, right? We can determine what resources we have available to us. So it gives you the ability to determine feasibility and next steps. So this is a very important part. All right, now the next one is easy. And again, it's going to look different on the other, but you basically take the ease of collecting score, right? So here, ease of collecting would be between 1 and 10. All right, and you plot it on the x-axis, and literally you're taking a little dot from your shapes. So you're saying, give me a shape, and I'm going to plot it here. Let's just say that I determined it was a 10. And the usefulness, right? So now usefulness, we did back here, our usefulness score. So let's say I had a usefulness score. I'm gonna make it a 7. Again, I'm just ad-libbing here. We have a real example. So I'm gonna drag this little guy up to the 7. All right, so that first one is gonna get plotted right here. And what you do is you plot all your metrics to determine where you're at. Okay, now are you going to have all high numbers? Like ease of collecting is easy peasy. Usefulness is really high, right? Let's say usefulness goes way up here. We'll just say, right? That's like perfect, okay? It's very easy to collect it, and it's very useful. Therefore, you should be collecting and using the data. Now, the one thing I will tell you is that it is very easy to collect in many cases, but difficult to make use of. It may be useful, but making use of is a function of the analysis, getting at the data, organizing the data, cleaning the data. As many of you in data analytics have found out, that's the other part of it, right? So, but if you're able to collect it and it is useful, that then gives you the impetus to say, we need to now analyze the data. We need to organize it. And that's kind of where Ramona is at right now, right? I've got some data. How do I organize it? All right. So let me just delete that there. And you do that for each metric, by the way. So even if data is readily available, the metrics will not automatically be created and distributed. So you write in your data sources here. You determine how the data is being, entered into the system, whether it's manual or automatic, and what's the incentive. You would just jot that here. All right. Where is it stored? Where's the data coming from? If it's paper, say it's on paper, it's physical. If it's in a Google Sheet, it's in a Google Sheet. If it's on the server, it's on the server, it's online. You want to just keep an idea of where it's stored, who creates the metric from the data, and who distributes it. Very important. So this is the who person. Who is doing this? Because the person that is driving this train, if you will, has to know where's the data coming from, how's it entered in, what's the incentive to make sure it's entered? Because if I have to be a steward to ensure or champion that process, I need to be engaged. Where is it stored? Why does that matter? Because that's where I'm going to look at the data, create the metrics from the data, and then distribute the results, right? So this is usually one or more people that's part of this process. Ideally, it takes a small, team to do this. If you're the champion, then you're the champion, right? So you may be the only person that happens, okay? So you want to map out the flow of where the data starts and where it ends. That's really what this is. This is closing the feedback loop, all right? And then down below, you're just making a list of who's in charge of this process from start to finish, and how you will spot check to ensure the metric accurately reflects reality. So this is just basically showing that you're closing the loop. One of the key things, if you're a business owner or you're a grant writer or you're part of that process, someone's going to say, how are you closing the loop? And this is going to be your diagram to show I have a full process in place. I know who is part of that process. I'm in charge of this process, let's say, or so-and-so is in charge of this process. Here's how I will spot check to make sure it's accurate. Now, if you're doing a grant, the grant folks, if it's the state, they're going to want to know, how are you maintaining accuracy, right, throughout this process? Let's say it's a 3-year grant. Who's going to be the champion to make sure that the metrics are being used and that the data is accurate? So you may be that individual, or you may have a designee, right? A project manager, program manager, what have you. If it's you and you're the sole proprietor, you're going to be the one, or maybe you're designating a staff person to do that for you, right? So you want to make sure you know exactly, and that there's communication, there's an understanding. Remember, it's about building a data-driven culture. All right, the next step, what process will be used to apply the metrics to decision-making? So here, you're just keeping track of how frequently you're creating the metrics, who will the metrics be distributed to? So for example, if so-and-so is going to collect data about engagement, you're going to have to distribute to the individuals that are part of that process, right? So those metrics will then be given to one or more groups of people to make sure that data is collected so that you can quantify what's happening with that metric, right? This one's a big one. In what meetings will the metrics be used? If you have weekly staff meetings, or if you have weekly meetings with, marketing people, you have weekly meetings with employees, you want to make sure that these metrics are on the agenda. They're on the agenda. So everyone is informed. What decisions shouldn't be made without these metrics? Very important. When it comes to engagements, you don't want to decide what to do for lack of engagement if you don't know the extent of the engagement, right? So you don't want to make any decisions that are from the gut without having data to really inform your decisions, because you might make a decision in error, and what happens is now you've had a negative impact potentially on your constituents. And then the last one is, how frequently will you plan to adjust your actions based on metrics results? And that's the last part of this side of the arrow. The very last one is, how frequently will you check on whether the metrics themselves are effectively measuring what you're attempting to measure? If you determine that the metrics are not measuring engagement, or you miss something, or you determine that you're not measuring that customer touch point that you now determine is superbly valuable, you add that metric. You don't say, oh my gosh, we didn't do this, therefore we can't do it ever again. You create the metric and you say, okay, from this point forward, we're going to measure it. How are you measuring it? We're doing it this way. Who's going to measure it? This person, that person. Why are we measuring it? Because we need to know X, Y, or Z, right? So you have that clear thought process. This is iterative, by the way. This isn't once and done. This is iterative. You want to be having a dialogue with everyone in the process. All right. Now, step 9 is very important. Okay. Keep in mind that you typically are going to plan this entire process, this framework, before you implement it. That's why you have a spreadsheet. The people that you need to buy into the data-driven culture, you want to make a list of who they are. It could be individuals, it could be groups, and then the method of including them. How are you going to include them? Are you going to invite them to meetings? Are you going to email them? Are you going to have, forums, some kind of weekly forum where they're part of it? Maybe a focus group, right? So who are the core individuals that need to buy into this process? Could be customers, employees, C-suite, IT, vendors, suppliers. How are you going to include them? All right. And then the processes that are needed to facilitate the culture. So, if let's say you have an order entry process and that's part of it, okay, you need to include it there. You have a vendor management or vendor contact, right? You do it there. Customer relationship management, you do it there. At the finance piece, let's say finance is part of the equation because people need to have additional information, and that's part of it. Finance gets involved. So at all points in the process, you make sure that those processes, business processes or organizational processes are brought into the loop. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to segue over to my sample. Okay. So let me make sure. Yes. Okay. This is the sample. So let me just share this. Can everyone see that? So we have the same sheet. Who knew? All right, so I'm going to give you this hypothetical, all right, very quickly. It's a local bakery. They offer in-home or the best of home baked goods and coffee, right? And there's an experience. They have a store. They have a bakery counter. They do holiday desserts, classic bakery. But recently, the main bakery counter cooler case stopped working. So their cheesecake sales had to be halted. just so happens they make the best cheesecake. Okay. This could be significantly a problem for a small business, right? Cheesecakes are expensive. There's a, there could be a high profit, especially if they're doing a lot of them. And so this is a big deal. All right. So they've had an equipment failure. Their customer base, before I go into that, they had to halt their cheesecake sales. The owners need to decide whether to repair it or replace the unit. That's a classic question for a small business. This thing has failed, or our server has failed. Do we replace it? Do we get new, right? It could be a big expense. Their customer base has been steadily decreasing over time. And lately there's been, a noticeable drop in customers, and they're not sure what's going on. And although some efforts have gone into marketing, it's unclear as to what campaigns are working, attracting new customers. They're really not sure. And historically, the company has been trying to get better at using the data they collect to gain insights and make effective decisions. Now, if you can imagine a busy bakery, they may not have the time. There's a lot of dark data. They're collecting data, but they're not able to get at the data. But they've got a nice history of data there. They've been trying though, but they recognize it's a process. So the new strategic plan specifically states, now you know where strategic plans come from, the head honcho, right? So now the new way of doing things is that the organization will become more data-driven to attract new customers, produce quality products, and they need to see a return on investments made with the company. So these types of things come down from the top down, and management is, basically left with, well, how do we do this? We've been a mess for so long. How do we address this? So they're going to want to implement a plan. So now management has been told you need to get it together and implement a plan. So the areas that they're going to explore further: recruiting customers, right? Data collection and analysis, customer satisfaction and retention, and marketing materials development. Now you'll notice we haven't addressed the cooler failure, right? We haven't addressed that here. But we know that if we don't sell cheesecakes, all of these things are going to be a problem. So right now they're comfortable in just addressing these things because the other was going to get addressed later. Okay. So the tactical questions they would ask is, what is the cost to recruit new customers? If we need to get new customers, what does it cost us, right? Can we measure that? Yes, it's a cost. And I'm going to show you formulas for that. Okay. Now, if you think of it this way, cost to recruit new customers could be anything, right? What is the churn rate? What percentage of customers are leaving us? What percentage are dropping out, whether it's camp or customers for the store, right? What percentage are churning, leaving us? The next one is, how successful are our marketing efforts? Well, that's a question that can be measured. How do we know we are retaining customers and acquiring new ones? Everything's a blur. We're so busy. We're doing our business. Everything's a blur, right? And the last one is, what benefits will investing in new equipment bring, right? So when it comes to equipment up here, I could have listed it, sure. But down here, I have an instant question. If we get new, what's it going to do for us? Can't we just fix the old, right? Which is a common thing, right? All right, step 2. So the owner cares very much about return on investment. That's high priority. The product developer, the person that decides what recipes we're going to bake and put out there, or what product offerings, services we're going to offer, they want it to be a quality product produced in an efficient way. That's what they want. They want efficiency. So that's high priority for them. The marketing department, they want tangible marketing results. Everybody wants something, right? So that's high priority. The sales staff, they want to have attractive product to sell. And if the cheesecakes are weeping because the cooler is going bad, that's not very attractive, right? If you're offering something and you're not proud to sell it, then you have to ask yourself why. Customer service, they want to make the job easy. You want us to contact all these customers, you want us to gather all this data, but it's not easy. We're having problems. Is it important to us? Yeah, it's medium. We're not sure. What good is it going to do, right? So they decided to sort of list that as medium. The head baker, this is the person that decides how much they're going to produce. So if he or she overproduces and creates waste, that's a cost to the company. So they're held to task, right? So this person wants to know that A, I'm able to produce a quality product and that it's efficient. So if I go to the trouble to produce very expensive cheesecakes where the ingredients are costly, I need to put it in a cooler case that's working. Simple, right? That's high priority. Inefficiency would be schlepping cheesecakes from maybe this cooler over here to that over there. And you know what happens with cheesecake? It gets messed up and then it doesn't look, the presentation's gone. And customers are like, where did this come from? It doesn't look so good, right? So the head baker is concerned about product quality and efficiency, very high. And those are the only two levels I have. Now you could take it to the next level and work with the counter clerks and what have you, but I kept it simple. I think you get the idea. Different levels, okay? Step 3, what specific decisions do you want to be able to make based on your answer to the question? So, and this is coming from the owner's perspective, but it's also the head baker's perspective because they're at the top, okay? So I want to know that the product produces the best quality. So both the owner and the head baker, they have that concern that there will be customers to buy the product, because if I produce product and it's not sold, I have waste on my hands, right? And that I will not overproduce product that has to be thrown away. How can I decide what to produce with these unknowns? So the decisions can't be made because they don't know what the cutoff is. They don't know how to decide. Do I produce X or Y? Okay. The next question, what things will I need to understand in order to prepare me to answer the question? So the person responds, I need to know how many repeat customers we have and how many new customers we expect in the future. Based on that, I can gauge how much to produce. And if I know that there's seasonality to it, that would be nice too. So this is a general, I need to know blah, right? You could get down to a more granular level and say, you know what, on Mondays, we don't sell a lot. So don't even bother. And by the way, Mondays are usually terrible for bakeries, just so you know, someone who worked in the field way back in the day, right? Mondays, you don't over bake, okay? So there may be additional add-ons to this. The third, will any answer to your question feel successful, or will you need to achieve something specific? So this is coming from the owner and the head baker's perspective. I need to see actual data. I often use my gut to decide what product should be produced each night. Here lately, my estimates are way off. All right. So this is basically guiding the process of creating metrics. Now, here are some metrics, and these are the formulas for them. Now, this is related to the customer, and this is related to churn rate and project return on investment. So let me walk through this. The customer lifetime value, how valuable are our customers? And we're talking about, repeat customers, customers over time. So we take the customer revenue per year, we multiply it by the number of years they've been with us, and then we subtract out the total cost to acquire that customer. And that's how we determine the value, the customer lifetime value. All right. That's something you definitely want to do, because if you have existing customers, how valuable are they to us? That will then determine the decisions you make with respect to product offerings, right? Here's another one, a classic one, customer acquisition cost. All right, and you see the formula there. So the point is, you would create these metrics for each of the things that you care about. When it comes to the project return on investment, let me talk about the cooler case. All right, what is the current value of the investment? The benefit. If I don't have a cooler case, what is the problem? What is the negative aspects, right? I could lose a lot of customers. How many customers? Well, how many people have bought cheesecakes in the last year? Okay, let's get a revenue amount for that. Well, that's your benefit, right? So my value of investment over my cost of investment is going to determine the ROI. If I lose customers as a result, that would have to be factored into, the value. What is the cost of losing that customer? Okay. So these are some examples of metrics. The idea is that you want to have a place where you know how you're going to be measuring these things. Okay. Step 4. So in step 4, the action here, I have 3 of them. Review the transactions, get a count of products ordered by category. So we talked about cheesecakes. Well, how many cheesecakes are ordered? Do we sell a lot of cheesecakes or a little? What's the return on investment if we were to invest in a new freezer? Well, that's a function of how much revenue you're getting from that, right? So we need to get some, some information. So we review our transactions. what's your ability to affect measurements? Can I do this? Yes, I can affect the measurement through my own actions. I have access to the data. All right. If I did this, how many would care? Now, it just so happens that I rated this as a 4 because there's some people, and I'm going to say the staff in the front of the store that don't feel they're included in everything because we lack a data-driven culture. They don't really feel that what they say matters. So they rated it a 4. So almost everybody in the entire organization cares, but there are some that are jaded. To what extent would seeing a measurement for this help your organization? Well, some people rated it as right? So it gets a 4. To what extent would your organization's actions quickly change the measurement? A 2. Now, this is where there is true apathy in this bakery because they've talked about this a lot over the years, but nothing's ever happened. Nothing's ever gotten done. And that's because they never had this type of process to move it forward. They never had a framework. So this got rated as a 2. So the usefulness score for these columns turned out to be a 10. And same for these others. So again, following it across the line here. Again, we're going to be emailing you both the sample and the blank. So you'll have both, okay? And then this, we did the same thing, or we could have done the same thing for employees or constituents. We decided not to take it that far because we want to focus on the champions of the data, okay? Next step, basically, we took the metric of counts of products ordered by category. We know that it came from the order entry process, so that's where it's being automatically coming in. Our cash register is data driven, so that's where it comes from. And we also feel that we could get some customer satisfaction data by perhaps doing some surveying and social media. So we've jotted that down as additional possibilities, customer perceptions. And then of course we have our collecting data for this metric, and we already have it. Same thing here, total orders per month and count comes from orders and transactions. We already have it. And then total spent per month, we have orders and transactions, but we also need to do some market research. So there's half of the information that we feel we could round it out and make it better. Step 6, we plotted the dots, as I mentioned, right? That's pretty easy. Step 7, we decided that, okay, everything's coming from order entry system, cash register, it's a SQL database. The owner and marketing staff basically creates the metrics, and the owner distributes it. That's the champion, okay? Who's in charge of the process? The owner. And how will we spot check? We're going to do periodic reports on a monthly basis to determine that we're on task, on target. How frequently will you create metrics? Monthly. Who will the metrics be distributed to? All first level staff, weekly staff meetings. We're going to do, we're not going to make any bakery production counts or decisions unless we have these metrics. And we're not going to have any marketing expenses because we found out that we're paying out a lot, but we're not getting, all right? Quarterly, we're going to revisit this, okay? And then the final is basically the people that I need buy-in, all staff. And we want to have, a way to determine that, we're including them. So staff meetings, company emails, suggestion boxes, and things of that nature. That's what we're going to be using to make sure they're part of the buy-in process, and also ensuring that the data is collected at the point of sale and that all fields are filled out. Okay, that's another thing. The data validation and filling out, just making sure that everything is filled out. That's how we're going to facilitate this. So that's the example.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is know-how.
Yeah.
This is the consulting know-how.
Yes.
In case if you need to report.
Yes. Yes.
To being
Yes.
data-driven, probably it's even more value, right?
Absolutely.
This
Absolutely.
is metric itself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. This is a process, and it's not something that's done overnight. Having a framework like this to guide your steps is very, very important.
Absolutely.
And so that's something that's really the purpose of this workshop.
I think it's applicable to the small business, like small, not for solopreneurs, but small, starting with like at least 5 people on the board.
Yes,
maybe 10
absolutely.
plus.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And keep in mind that you could customize this to add individuals. You can tailor this to your own needs. This gives you a starting point, and that's what's really important. Getting the process started is really it's so important, because if you're not doing it or you don't know where to start, this helps.
Any questions? It was too much, I know.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Shall
hard to
we-
do in 2 hours. This is normally a long class, right? So we usually in a class will go through this slower. So this is a high level view to show you how it's done.
I have a question logistically. You have the
Yes.
second class announced in 2 weeks. What do you want to cover on the second class?
Well, I think that I would like to know what individuals need, and I can customize and tailor it to that second class. What I think would might be useful, but again, I'm using my gut, is perhaps assisting people with filling out their spreadsheet.
Oh, okay.
That might be a good idea. People can bring the sheet to the class and ask questions, and we can kind of meet and discuss ideas and brainstorm. But I think if people were able to, be assisted in working through this, that might be useful, but I'm open to suggestion.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Saying that, I would stop the recording and we can have any kind of discussion you want.
Okay. So we have a little bit of a problem.
Yes,
It doesn't say I'm recording.
I am recording. No worries.
Okay. Sure. Okay.
Yeah, it shows it.
I
And-
feel relief now.
Yep, I am stopping. now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. It was
There's-
awesome. It was like really know-how. Priceless now. Priceless one.